why don't you just start with telling us who you are and where you're from?
Sure. Thank you for having me. My name is Mitchell Thompson, and I'm from Detroit, Michigan.
Okay. Detroit, Michigan. How old are you, Mitchell?
I'm 24 years old.
Excellent. Excellent. What was it like growing up in Detroit?
Detroit's a unique place. We are a little bit a shell of what we used to be, but it's on the recovery. The auto industry, as many people know from the United States, was in Detroit, and we made cars. That was our focus for a lot of our history. A lot of beautiful buildings in Detroit. The architecture is amazing. The food's great. We're a little bit in the shadow of Chicago. Everyone knows Chicago, but Detroit, I forgot that was there. But beautiful place. I was about an hour north of Detroit, where I grew up.
So, were your parents in the automobile industry?
My mother did work for General Motors, and interestingly, she wasn't in assembly or anything. She worked for some of the subsidiaries within GM, and actually the food service business. She worked everything from feeding all these line workers who come in for lunch, 6,000 people at a time, and managing these restaurants and these manufacturing plants, to executive dining, where you have a much smaller group of people and an elevated clientele. So she did it all. My father, he passed when I was young, but he was in business. He worked for an oil distribution company. And in Michigan, there's a lot of demand in the winter for fuel oil, heating farm equipment, all that. And that was his business.
Sorry to hear about your dad.
Oh, thank you.
Would you mind talking about what happened with your father?
I'd be happy to talk about it. It's not a problem. I was 2 when he passed. It was a sudden accident that had caused his death. It was wrong place, wrong time, a dispute with a couple gentlemen, and it was essentially a murder. And the family went through many trials before they were prosecuted, and that was more or less the result of that. But I had a great upbringing anyway. My mother was amazing, and my family very supportive, family friends. I have a very large family.
Mm-hmm.
It's beyond my blood relatives. I have a lot of great people in my life that made me who I am.
So I'm sure that had a profound impact on your mom.
Oh, certainly. No doubt about that. Actually, it was an interesting result. I think in many ways it made us closer because we had this big loss between us. My mother and I became very close. I was an only child, so we were a team, and we continue to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Life throws us all sorts of curveballs, but
Absolutely does.
we grow through that.
Sure. So you're an only child. When you were young, we'll say as early as you can remember, what were some of your interest points? You know, some kids pick up sports, some kids pick up engineering with Legos, and
Sure.
what was your thing? Some kids loved outer space. What was your...
Yeah, that's a good point. As a young kid, first things I remember loving. I love to be outdoors. I really enjoy being outside. I learned to swim when I was young. I lived in Michigan. We have the beautiful 4 seasons and lots of lakes around us, and I love to be outside. Catching frogs as a kid, I remember. You'd wade in the swamp and try and catch them. And I wasn't too much of a fisherman, but I liked fish. I liked to watch the fish and to see them go by, and that's really what I enjoyed. But I really liked nature from not so much the perspective of, oh, this is great or beautiful, which it is. I liked thinking about how it all worked together and trying to figure out why does the fish eat that bug and not the other one? Or why do those plants grow in the shade and the others grow in the sun? And that sort of thinking is what I started with as a young kid, is wondering why things were how they were. I guess most kids are curious of that. And that was the very beginnings for me, was being outdoors. That was a huge impact on my life and continues to.
Were you religious at all?
No, I wasn't. My dad's side of the family were religious, but they would attend church on Sunday and a lot of traditions that way. My mom's family wasn't so much. We were kind of our own beliefs of more morality, I suppose, than a certain entity. We feel, you should be moral to people. You should be a good person, as you would say, as a generalization. But as far as my personal beliefs in what is after, I certainly think there's something. But I find all the world religions to be quite beautiful, and there's a lesson in each of them. And I think that's between each person and their own God at the end of it. So I'm very at peace with that. But no particular religion growing up.
Yeah, I asked because the way you were looking at nature and how it all works, I wonder if that ever led you down a spiritual...
Oh, sure. That's a great observation. I've certainly thought through things due to the relationship with nature about how is this? And everyone has a different answer. And I haven't found mine yet. That's how I feel.
Very respectable. What were you like, Mitchell, as a student in school? Let's think like middle school and high school.
Sure. I love to learn. I wasn't always good at it, but I did like to learn. I found things I didn't understand particularly interesting because there was a challenge, and I liked that. Mathematics were not my strong suit at all. I really liked math because of the things it could show you, the things it could teach you, but I was much more a writer. I was much more a storyteller than I was a technical student in that sense. Though science, like nature, I loved, and I liked when I could do something hands-on. The abstract theories were more challenging, though interesting to me. I liked when I could prove it with my hands and see the result of doing certain things. So, as a student, I loved school, and I did okay in school. There were people smarter than me, for sure, and there were people I think that struggled more with their classes, but I tried to make the best of it.
And that wasn't very long ago, because you're...
No, I'm young.
Yeah.
Yes.
Actually, tell us how old you are.
I'm 24 years old.
Okay, so you're interested in learning in school, pretty good student. Tell us what takes place after high school. What path did you choose?
Sure. So, if I may even say within school, I started to realize I liked storytelling and I liked learning about culture, and that led me down a path of studying language. I really liked the French language and started that in middle school and continued through college with French. And it was more than just the language. It was understanding the culture, the people, and a lot of things that come with the French language. Consequently, I had an interest in watches. That started when I was in second grade. My mother, back to school shopping, said, well, you need to know how to tie your shoes. We're not buying Velcro shoes. You need to know how to tell the time. And you're not getting a digital watch. You're going to get a watch with hands on it, an analog watch. I said, okay, Mom. So I got a watch with hands on it, which, to my point, was the best way for me to tell the time because there was something visual. I could see the hands. I would think of time as a pie chart. I could divide out my time, where with a digital watch, it's pretty abstract. You have to imagine, well, where are the hands? And that's how I think about time. If someone tells me the time, I have to think of the hands. So I liked watches. That first watch I got really changed me, and I wondered how it worked. I wanted to understand it. And why I mentioned the French and the watches is those became the two most valuable things, I think, to my career. Towards the end of high school, I realized I liked watches enough and so much that I wanted to make a career out of it. I wanted to do something with watches. And in the United States, there's a lot of watchmaking history, in Pennsylvania in particular. But today, everyone uses their cell phone. So how is that still a profession? And I started asking myself those questions. How can I get involved in this and make it something great? Because there's still watches, and people still buy them. So I looked from a technical perspective about learning how to fix watches. That seemed to be the most direct way to involve that. And at the end of high school, I had applied to many watchmaking schools, which there aren't too many in the United States. And I was going to go in place of traditional university studies. And I didn't get in. I wasn't accepted. So I said, I guess I'll find a different path for now and come back to it when it's a better time. And I then professionally went to continue my French studies at Michigan State University. And I worked after Michigan State at Shinola Detroit, which was a watch company there. And they're really making some groundbreaking innovations now. Shinola is doing amazing things. And my start was really with Shinola. And I left Michigan State in the middle of my academic career to take a job as a line worker, as many people in Detroit did with production, to learn more about watches. And I spent my time there, which was an amazing experience for the 2 years I was there before reapplying to watchmaking school, and ultimately got in.
Which one did you get into?
I attended the Lidditz Watch Technicum in Pennsylvania.
And what does that entail? Like, when you get into that, what are they focused on? What's the end goal? What's the trajectory when you get into a school like that?
Sure. So the end goal of attending a school like this is to ultimately provide the skill set in the after-sales service of luxury watches. Why luxury watches? Well, arguably, luxury watches are the only ones worth repairing, because the cost of repair shouldn't exceed the value of the piece. And it's pretty costly repair on average, so it needs to be a luxury watch to be worth repairing. Those sorts of watches people have and wear their lifetime and need to maintain. So that's the end goal, is to support the industry by servicing watches that are out there. We have a lot of watches that need to be fixed. Even in today's modern society, people wear watches as jewelry, and they need them to work. They're largely emotional pieces of jewelry. So what does a school like that entail? That's the end goal, is your first question. And the second, what does it entail, is a lot of dedication. You have to have passion. If you don't love this profession, it will take you out of it. You have to love it. And it's not because it's something that isn't enjoyable. It's very enjoyable. It's a very satisfying career. You're helping people, but you're also proving how well of a problem solver, or how good of a problem solver, how well you can problem solve. And that's something I really enjoy about it.
Yeah. Would you say that you are you really good with puzzles?
I love puzzles, yes.
For some reason, I was equating that to the
very similar.
Watch.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because with each watch, you never know what's wrong, and you have to find the problem. Right. And that's what I enjoy.
I want to go back real quick to your childhood, because you mentioned your first watch in second grade. Do you remember what watch that was?
I do remember.
What was it?
It was a Timex. It was a kid's Timex. It was this plastic watch that came on this elastic band, and it had a lightning bolt on the band, or a couple lightning bolts, but the second hand was a lightning bolt. And I got in trouble one day in second grade. I remember my second grade teacher, her name was Mrs. Simic, and she was a great teacher. But I was sitting there watching the second hand on my watch, and she says, pay attention, we're learning something about probably nature. And I'd already studied lots of that as a kid walking around outside. So I was more interested then in my watch, and that's an early memory.
The old Timex, love it.
Yes.
So after you graduated from this watchmaking program, then what?
I was fortunate. This time in our industry, there is so much demand for watchmakers. More watches are selling than ever. And it's not any one particular brand necessarily that it's exclusive to. It's the industry as a whole has seen more sales.
When was this?
This started, I would say, around 24 months ago. So we're looking back 2 years that we saw an uptake in demand. And it has been on the increase since the mid-90s. In fact, my school was started to help fulfill this shortage of watchmakers because they realized more sales were happening, which inevitably the watches will eventually need maintenance. It's a mechanical device, like a car needs an oil change. It has to be maintained. So they founded the school to try to meet that demand, but then it went up at an unbelievable rate that wasn't anticipated in the recent 2 years. Lots of speculation as to why, but all we know is more watches are being sold than ever, and they will inevitably need maintenance. So that was a great time for me. I was just completing watchmaking school, and I entered a very hungry industry that needed watchmakers, and there were more jobs than watchmakers. So I looked at working for some major brands, and I looked at working for some major brand retailers. And I ultimately chose the retailer because I like the in-person interaction. As much as I like fixing the watch, which is really the focus at the brand, I like the customer service aspect also, which is what pulled me to the retailer.
And which retailer is that?
I presently work at Providence Diamond in Cranston, Rhode Island. They're a Rolex retailer as well as a Shinola, Tag Heuer, and Tudor watch retailer as well.
Excellent. So I'm thinking 24 months ago was the uptick, so 24 months ago we were in the middle of a pandemic.
That's very true.
So it seems like that could be direct cause of the uptick. Some correlation.
I do believe there may be some correlation, and I attribute it to as many people who find enjoyment in travel weren't able to travel at that time, chose what else that makes them happy, which happens to be jewelry. People like shiny things, and it made them happy, and I think that's really why there was a big uptake. As a whole, watches anyway were going up in demand, but I think such a great leap forward was an increased amount of money and time, and people put it into a watch.
So how did you end up in Rhode Island?
I ended up in Rhode Island because I knew their retailer, Providence Diamond, was looking for a watchmaker, and Providence Diamond reached out to me initially, actually, and they said, well, we need a watchmaker. And I spoke with them, and the conversation went well and evolved to coming out for an interview, and I interviewed with them, and the conversation went well, and ultimately became a job offer, which I happily took, and I've been very, very happy in my current position. Working there, and I am doing everything I wanted. I'm fixing watches, but there's also an element of interacting with a client, and a client professionally, but they're the person who wears this watch, and I want to know who they are. I want to know what makes the watch special to them, and that adds value to what I do. I enjoy that.
How does that affect, like, how does who the client is affect how you fix their watch or make their watch?
It dramatically affects how the service process will go for the client. To be frank, the watch is the watch. It works or it doesn't. There's a set procedure for how you service the watch. But what isn't set is the client's expectation of what service means. Some say, I need my watch cleaned. Well, does that mean that we just clean the outside of it and it's shiny again? Or do they mean an oil change? Do they mean a full service, a full overhaul, as we say in the watchmaking world, where the watch is completely disassembled worn parts that no longer meet a brand's criteria are replaced. Everything's ultrasonically cleaned and reassembled, proper lubrication after the repairs are made. And the case and bracelet of the watch would be refinished, the crystals often replaced, and all gaskets replaced. The watch is tested to be waterproof again, and it's reassembled to meet the original performance standards of the watch. That's a full service, which may take weeks to complete, which is a lot different than the client who just wanted their watch cleaned, which they'll wait while you go clean it. So who the client is what they have to tell me. They have to tell me, I'm someone who wears this watch occasionally. Maybe it's a special occasion watch, or I wear this watch every day and I have for 30 years. In fact, I've worn it straight through the last 30 years. It's never been off my wrist. That's going to tell me it might need a little more work than a watch that is very casually worn or not frequently worn. It tells me a lot about what they need, and I have to find out what they need. That's part of my job.
Sure. Now, we met at an event specifically for Rolex.
Yes.
How much of your work pertains specifically to Rolex watches?
Sure. So as I work at a Rolex retailer, I am servicing 100% of the time Rolex watches. Though we carry other brands, our service division just isn't to the level yet in its growth where we have the time or resource to take on other brands. So our focus is Rolex presently, but our other brands for now are going to their vendors. So a Shinola watch will go back to Shinola for service because the brands have the proper equipment and the proper tools and the proper parts to maintain their own watches, where we're fortunate within our retailer to offer service on site as a plaque retailer. So we not only vend the product, we also are able to service it for the majority of the product line. There are still certain certain models or certain product that must go back to the corporation directly because they have specialists there trained for that product, or certain special refinishing techniques and parts access that has to go to the retailer, from the retailer to the manufacturer, rather.
Sure. What makes Rolex different?
Rolex is different in a lot of ways. They are a product that, in my opinion, has built a reputation on their reliability. They have designed their watches to be simple in a way, but that's not a problem. The simplicity is really quite complicated. It's hard to make a design that's simple and that transcends the years. It is really quite amazing how they've designed their watches. And the design, people say, well, design or function? Design, that's aesthetic. I'm talking about the function of the watch. Well, the design is the function. That they are not separate in the world of watchmaking. Aesthetics are function. And people sometimes are confused by that. And what I mean is, you have to read the watch. You have to be able to see it. You have to be able to wear it every day. It has to match your clothes. It has to be something that goes with you everywhere. And tell me, how many pieces of clothing do we have that we can wear every day and it goes with everything and it's always on you? It's not a common thing. We're dressed up or dressed down depending the occasion, and a watch is still on you. That's an accessory that has to fit. So that's what I believe makes Rolex unique, is their design inside and out. And I'll get into the technical inside in a second, but the aesthetic, the function of that is brilliant. They have set designs that have been the benchmark for watchmakers and brands ever since their release, and that is unique to them. Other brands have their own designs that people know, but Rolex has been the benchmark for a long time. They are always what people refer their watch to. Well, I have a Rolex. How does this watch compare? And that's really the truth. From the technical side, that simplicity continues, where the reliability is because they don't overcomplicate things. They really think through the design in a way that not many have, and it makes them serviceable. It makes them able to be worn for many years without any intervention. And I'm really passionate about the product in their design. It's really remarkable. Are there more expensive watches, more complicated watches? Absolutely. Are there less expensive, less complicated? I don't know about less complicated, but there are less expensive watches. So a question I'm often asked is, what's the best watch in the world? And that's to the wearer. That's up to each person to decide. I can't tell you. But if you want a really good, reliable watch, I recommend Rolex often to people. It's a great product.
Is there something in the technicality of a watch that makes it more valuable than another watch? So taking away materials and
Sure.
just the technical inner workings of it, what makes that valuable?
Certainly. That's a great question. So materials aside, we're excluding gold and diamond and all the beauty of the watch. But the inner workings, the movement itself, are there particularly more desirable watches or movements than others? Certainly. It depends the collector. Many watch people are collectors, and they might have a certain type of watch in their collection, and they might be trying to acquire the next type, or a particular complication fascinates them. And I should touch on what is a complication. So inherently, a watch tells the time. That is expected. So the watch movement tells the time. That's all that's expected from the watch. Anything in addition to telling the time is considered a complication. So a watch with a date has one complication. A watch with a date and a power reserve indicator that tells you how long the watch will run for has two complications, and so on. And yes, you can get watches that have upwards of 15 complications that are completely mechanical. It's really fascinating. But so is the service cost. It's pretty fascinating. As well as those types of watches become a little more delicate, but you understand the reason you're purchasing that watch is very different from the reason you might purchase a Rolex that you plan to wear every day, that's waterproof, that's self-winding. A more complicated watch is beautiful and mechanically marvelous, but it's for a different reason you would wear that or have it in your collection. It's something that you buy to appreciate that. But also, people buy Rolex to appreciate the simplicity. Sometimes less is more, and there's something quite beautiful in that. So, yes, there are movements that are more desirable than others for their function, and the prices typically follow.
How high on the list of value is waterproof?
Sure, truly waterproof, which is Rolex. They are the only brand that can say that they're truly waterproof because they have proven that the waterproof depth rating on their watches, it is purely waterproof to that, and actually a little beyond, which is what makes it waterproof. Where oftentimes you hear water resistant, which is little legal caveat in case something goes wrong. And waterproof is pretty important for the modern wearer, in my opinion. We are used to product we can have or replace easily. So when you're looking at something that you're keeping, it needs to be pretty capable. You're in the pool, you're at the beach, especially here in Rhode Island. Wherever you may be, it's important, I think, that you can have your watch on at all times. It's a piece of you.
Right. Interesting part of having a watch is if it was waterproof. If I could
Sure.
go to the ocean and jump in the ocean or jump in a pool, if I could do that, I found value personally in that.
Absolutely. And I think it's an expectation today. I mean, many phones now are even to some degree water resistant. So we expect that from products, but the watch in particular, and the function of the watch, for many divers, it's an essential tool. So waterproof watches were a big breakthrough when that came to be. But for the casual wear, I think it's important.
Sure. Now, did you accumulate a collection of watches as a kid growing up?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Probably more
Absolutely.
than your friends.
Oh, yeah. I loved watches. Any extra penny I would put towards watches just because I was so interested in all the different designs, the different brands. You know, why do people like this brand? Why do they like this one? And I had to sample it all. I had to try a little of everything to see in wearing the watch. Wow, how does this make me feel? Do I like how it looks? How's it run? Does it work? That's important. Some don't. Some watches don't work too well. But that's something that I can say with certainty. Yes, I had a lot of watches always. I was fortunate for that and continue to.
When is the first time you had a Rolex?
I was really fortunate. I was pretty young. I think I was 18 or 19. I would visit jewelers just because I liked the product, and I didn't have the money then, but I would go around and look at watches. I'd talk with people and learn about it. And really, I liked the community and the passion of people who liked watches. And I met some really intellectual and nice people through the watch community. But all the same, walked into a retailer back home in Michigan one day, and they had GMT Master 2 in the case. It was a steel watch, the black bezel, black dial, and that's the model reference 116710. And that model is no longer made. In fact, when I saw that in the case, it was still manufactured. I purchased it. I said, I have to have this, and I, maybe recklessly, spent all my money on this watch. And I walked out with it, and a month later, the model was retired. They didn't produce it anymore. And I'm still in touch with that retailer, and they told me that that was the last one they'd ever received. And I've had countless clients of mine, countless friends say, hey, you know, are you thinking about parting with that watch? I really want one of those. And it became pretty sought after. I was lucky to get one. So that was my first contemporary Rolex that I purchased. And I didn't regret it at all.
I believe that. Can you tell us just a little bit about, can you almost give us a very brief education on the components of a watch?
Sure, I can, absolutely. I'll keep it very, very straightforward. Mm-hmm. So I tell people, and maybe I shouldn't say it at a luxury retail front, your watch is just a wind-up toy. And most people get a little laugh out of that. It's it's meant to have some humor in that, but it is. It's a wind-up toy. And you have a power source. You have a means of transmitting that power source through which the display is connected, the hands are connected, so you can see the transmission. And then you have a means of controlling the release of that power source. So at the very base, you have four elements: source of power, transmission, display, and then a regulation of the release of the power. Because if we didn't regulate it, it really would be a wind-up toy. You'd wind it up and it'd unwind, and you'd have to wind it up again, which doesn't do us too well when we're trying to use it to tell the time. But those are the most basic elements of a watch. And that applies to the electronic watch also. A battery-powered watch has the same principles. You have a power source, a means of transmission and display, and a means of regulating that release of power. That's it. That's all the watch is. Now, to make it practical, yes, it needs to be put into a case that's worn on the wrist and attached by a strap or bracelet so that you may wear it. But the very basic function is really not too complicated. It's just really small.
Right. With this passion for watches for so long, I'm curious to know, what's your relationship with time?
It's a great question. I like that question a lot. My relationship with time. Well, I think it's valuable, and that's a cliche, but it's true. Time is really valuable. A colleague of mine once said, a real watchmaker is somebody who looks at a watch all day and still doesn't know what time it is. And I told him, I said, well, you must not be doing a good job fixing that watch if it doesn't tell the right time. But what he meant by that is we're so absorbed by what we love that I don't know what time it is. I get into work and I look up at the clock or my watch and it's time to leave. And I just blinked my eye. I loved it. So time for Watchmaker, I think it's really fast. You get into that flow of work and you love it, and it's passion, and pretty soon the day's over. And you don't want to go home, actually. You don't want to leave. You're a little upset you have to take lunch. That's how I feel anyway. And
that's your professional relationship with time. What about Mitchell?
Sure.
Mitchell's personal relationship with time.
My personal relationship with time, it's varied. Sometimes time goes fast. Sometimes my perception is time goes slower. When I'm doing something I like, it's pretty quick, but I value my time. I'm doing something maybe that isn't as fun. I'm a lot more thoughtful, I think, in time. I observe it more, but time is something that we exist among. Time is going to happen with or without us, but it's how we perceive it. So is it a good or bad relationship? I think it's a good relationship with time, but time is an interesting subject. It's very abstract. It's a construct that we've created to quantify our days, and it's only what we make of it, to be honest.
A lot of people fear time.
Yeah, there's a lot of fear with time. I guess in relation to religion and death, which I recently, just yesterday, the day before yesterday, came back on a flight from a funeral back in Michigan. A mentor of mine passed away. Without him, I wouldn't have my career, actually. I had a very serious hand injury when I was 15, and Dr. Warner, he was my surgeon, and a dear friend anyway, but he really wanted me to be a surgeon. And ultimately, I became a watchmaker, and he was content with that. But we talked a little about that. He had been sick for a while. You know, what is time? What do you really think? And he was someone who wasn't so much afraid of time, but he accepted it as just a construct we live in. It's like gravity, which there's a whole theory on gravity and time's relationship, but we exist among it, and you can be afraid of it or you can accept it. It's really how you want to look at it, and I'm not afraid of time. I think it's a great thing. We say time is limited, sure, but it's a beautiful thing in an interesting way, because if it wasn't limited, things wouldn't have value. If there wasn't a limit to our bank accounts, making financial decisions and what we choose to have or not wouldn't mean anything if you could have everything. So I think it creates value. I think time is an essential part of enjoying life. It has to be limited.
That's a great answer. It's fantastic. I'm thinking now that you said your surgeon wanted you to be a surgeon, maybe some of the fine motor skills involved in watchmaking kind of translate to similar
Very much
movements.
They do. Surgeons are problem solvers. Medical school is a big commitment if you want to do that, which to anyone in medical school, thank you. We need you, but it's a big commitment. And that's a passion-driven profession. If you don't love it, you won't make it. You have to love what you're doing. But yes, there are a lot of similarities. A little less risk when it's a watch, because it might be an expensive mistake, but we can get more parts. Where the person, you have one shot. So maybe that's why I prefer the watches. I liked a little less pressure. Yeah.
Do you ever think about your father?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What do you think?
I wonder what it would have been like to know him. I think that's something a person asks themselves. If you don't know your parent or a relative or anybody, I wonder what they were like. That's the first question, which I was fortunate to get answered through talking with friends of his through family. And what was he like? What would he do? And I hear from a lot of people, though I didn't know him, I have a lot of the same mannerisms, or there's certain traits you share from your parents that I think are definitely nature and not just nurture. But I think he and I would have had a good relationship, and we would have learned a lot from each other. But it's a positive thing when I reflect on my father. It's not so much I get caught up at that I didn't have it, as much as I appreciate what it could have been, and that makes me want to work hard in my life. And though I didn't know my father, I'd at least like to have shown him what I did. So that's kind of my drive in that way, when I think of my father, at least. But yeah, he's in my thoughts, whoever he was. And I did know him for 2 years, but I have no memory of him that early on, no recall. Some people do, some don't. I looked at photos wondering if I had any memory, but I never did. But yeah, it's the general feeling I have towards my father is I think he was a really hard worker from what I've known of him, and he did his best for the time he was here in his lifetime, and that was that. So, yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a question that we ask everybody.
Sure.
And then I'm going to have you tell us something after this that we have everybody tell us. But first, I want you to go back to your 12-year-old self. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And you're sitting there with your 12-year-old self. What do you tell him? 12-year-old Mitchell, what do you tell him?
Learn everything you can about watches. You were right. You love it, and that's what you should do. You should love it fully and be fearless in that. I think I ultimately arrived there. I don't think I deviated too much from that, from 12 to now. But there's certainly been uncertainty, like, is this, you're not going to university, you're not completing your 4-year degree, all these social pressures we have, or why don't you go do this, or why aren't you an accountant? Nothing against accountants, but a more streamlined profession where you know it's good, you know it's safe. This was a little bit out there, and there was risk. But without passion, I guess there's no risk. So you can't have one without the other. So I'd say, without a single fear, pursue it wholeheartedly.